As part of the South Door and Organ Project conversation series, I've been speaking with people who are architects and theologians, sculptors, and I've also been speaking to members of the congregation who each bring their own expertise because of the history of their relationship to this place and this church, and also because of their own connections to the way in which this project is transforming this place and the way in which their interests, both informal and more specific to church life, have a really strong link to the project as a whole. And so I'm here with someone who's been part of St. James's for a really long time. And would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Cornell Jackson. I've been here since 2000, and I have been Church Warden for 6 years, from 2002 to 2008.
And part of your work here at St. James's has involved looking at the layered histories of monuments and memorials, as well as being aware over the last 25 years of the different kinds of projects and ambitions that St. James's has had, not only for the building, but also for social transformation. So let's start there first. Over the last few months, finally, work has begun for the Wren project. And as someone who comes to church every Sunday, you, like everyone else, began to see that there was this funny little wooden hut that was built on the south side in the aisle, and that there was a huge amount of scaffolding for a few weeks surrounding the organ. What did it feel like for you, as a longtime member of St. James's, to come into the church and see the signs of this building project beginning all around you?
Well, it was nice to see. I mean, we've been talking about and doing it, and it's been a few times we've had, what shall I say, disruptions, things had planned to start, it didn't start, but so it's nice to see it starting. So.
You have a particular interest in the 17th century history, the very beginnings of St. James's and of this area of London, and you've really been looking into the life of Henry Jermyn and to the establishment of this church and its early generations. What would you like to share about that, what you've learned, and also what you're curious about, what questions remain unanswered so far?
Is there any particular area you want me to hit with that answer? Because there's a lot of things that...
You can talk about whatever you wish, perhaps what your interest is in Henry Jermyn, how that got started with you, and why he's so important in this local area.
Okay. A long time ago, I saw on the BBC a documentary by David Olashoga, who was talking about the missing, or not missing, but the unknown slave owners who lived in Britain, and how Britain profited from the slave trade. And he talked about how good records they kept of the slave owners and the slaves they owned. And I thought, I wonder how many people owned slaves in this area. It was about the right time. It's, starting in 1684. That's not far after the establishment of the slave trade. And so I went and looked at the records, which are at the National Archive. And fortunately, University College London, the Department of History, went to the National Archives, got out the records of especially those who received compensation in the 1830s for having to give up their slaves.
Yeah.
So I did that. Went to the National Archive, but also the History Department of University College London went there and collated all that stuff and put it into a database.
How did you know what you were looking for? Did you go street by street or name by name?
I went looking at the parish. Mm-hmm. Now, the problem I had was that the parish boundaries in 1836 are not the same as 2025.
I see.
So there's a little roughness to who was in the parish and who was not in the parish. But I came up with 50 names, put it into a spreadsheet, and recorded when they got paid, how much they got paid, how many slaves they owned. Mm. So no one directly attached to the church was in that list.
What do you mean by directly attached to the church? Do you mean the people
Clergy.
Where we have their memorials, the clergy who were here, the records that are basically the things that are on the record that we can find so far?
Yes.
We haven't got that direct connection with, say, plantations and enslavement and that particular profiteering off of the dehumanization of people, according to the UCL database. Is that correct?
Yes, I think that's generally correct. I'm not guaranteeing anything because of the uncertainty about who was in the parish and who was not.
Yeah.
I definitely know no clergy was part of the ownership of slaves.
Which is a relief in a way, but also is one of those moments where at St. James's we talk about telling our story, telling our history honestly, and the relationship between the unjust economic gain from enslavement and even the very existence of this part of central London and well beyond. In a way, there was so much entanglement around that. And we know for sure that not just because of the area, but because of people's politics and the way in which certain expectations around society and capitalism existed, there would have been people at St. James's every week through all of the many generations and all those decades of the transatlantic chattel slave trade, where some would have been supporters of enslavement and its so-called benefits, and others were abolitionists and had a variety of different perspectives to bring and activism that they were engaging with. So what I'm curious about is that amongst those 50 people, and also amongst those whose names we have in our memorials in and around the building, and 5 of those memorials have been on the south wall of the church for a long time and have just been moved elsewhere because of the South Door project. Those memorials primarily are late 18th, early 19th century. So sure. If we asked any of those individuals, any of those 5, and in fact there are a couple of others in those 5 memorials, because one of them at least is to 2 people. If we asked these people, what do you think about enslavement? What is your view? Each of those individuals, we might get some really surprising and some quite different answers, and all of them lived, worked, had their hopes and dreams and had their joys and sorrows in and around our neighborhood, if you like.
Yeah. Well, let me do one person that will illustrate how complicated it gets. When Henry Jermyn was a royalist during the Civil War and fought for the king, and he helped the king escape, and helped take care of the king when he was exiled in France. Henry Jermyn was one of the key people doing that. So obviously the king was very grateful. So he first made Jermyn the Earl of St. Albans, and then he invited him to various things, but one of the key ones was to join the, let's get this right, the society, the Company of Royal Volunteers in Africa.
The Company of Royal Volunteers in Africa.
Right.
Okay.
Now, they did several things. They did some training in Africa, ivory, things like that. But the big money maker, of course, was slave trading. And he joined. And when they put out a prospectus, and the prospectus is some document that a company gives out to invite people or encourage people to join. And I think the minimum joining fee was £400. So this was in 1660.
£400 in 1660.
Yeah, which is a lot of money.
It is, and that was 2 years before he was granted the land in and around this parish boundary now for development, for his benefit and the benefit of others. So it's all happening at around about the same time.
Yes, and the company, I think, officially started. I think I have the document somewhere on my iPad where it lists all the investors in the company, and his name is near the top.
So it's not alphabetical, so he must have put in an awful lot of money into this company.
Yes. So the company got started trading in slaves, but then they got into it with the Dutch because they were competing on who controlled the slave trade in West Africa. And it started at least one war. And in fact, that's how we Americans got New York.
Ah, New Amsterdam. Is that how that all started?
Yes.
Wow.
Because James, who was then the Duke of York, he became the King James II, but Duke of York wanted to do a surprise attack on the Dutch where they wouldn't expect it. So he sailed to New York and took New York during this war. Or New Amsterdam, sorry. It became New York because he was the Duke of York.
So these connections are all bound up in that early history of St. James's. And your interest in this has definitely deepened over the time that you've been a member of the congregation here.
Yes.
One of the features of the South Door project here is that it is going to reconnect St. James's to Jermyn Street. We talk about the Piccadilly North Side and the Jermyn Street South Side of St. James's all the time. And yet, the entrance from Jermyn Street into St. James's, as Christopher Wren intended in the 17th century, was bricked up in the 19th century. Part of our plan is to take a number of fewer than the tens of thousands where this was the case, but to take a number of memorials and monuments from the old burial ground, which was up near Euston, which was opened in the late 18th century and then ran until the mid-19th. Thankfully, some at least of those names will come back to us in these ledger stones, and they will become incorporated into the fabric of the project.
And that's from the archaeological project that the Museum of London not architects
the Museum of London Archaeology Department. That's right. So it was one of the largest archaeology projects ever undertaken.
And they came out with 90,000 stone memorials that were left over.
It's something like that. I sort of feel like the 60,000 is the number that's rolling around in my head, but it may be even more than that. It's an incredible number. And so it was really precious to St. James's to be able to bring some of those back, to be able to tell the story in as diverse a way as we could of our local community, the people who lived here but then had to be buried elsewhere because central London had become too busy, too overcrowded with both the living and the dead. Effectively, the churchyards had become too small. And so, oddly enough, because of the HS2 project, we now have the opportunity to reincorporate those names and lives into the story of St. James's. I wonder what you think about that, about having even more memorials and monuments come to join the names that we have on the church walls now. We're gonna learn a little bit more, see more, and know more. What do you think?
If we have the room for it, yeah, why not? Did they find? I have a question. Did they ever find Bill Richmond's grave? He was the African American who came here with a big boxer.
I'm not sure. Tell me about who he is, and maybe we can explore that more when we learn more about the project. Was he an African sportsman? Is that right? Is he's in boxing, as you say?
Yes, I think he was a slave in North America.
Ah, wow.
Came to London, and was I knew his history better a little earlier, but and he became a big guy with boxing. He was known well in London for his boxing ability.
So he was known in London for how great a boxer he was. Do you remember around about what year or what time this was? Was it late 18th century, early 19th century?
Late 18th century, early 19th century, probably. I'll have to look that up.
I'd love to know more about him. I really hope that we can learn more about him in relation to a memorial, but I'm not sure. And he is one of the few, but also one of the deeply significant Black people associated with the history of St. James's. So would love to know more.
Yeah.
And when Kwabena Adaba Kugwano was honored and remembered with two major projects at St. James's in 2023. One of them is the memorial that's now near the font where he was baptized as a teenager. And I wonder what you think about that monument, like as an object, as a work of art in itself. Does it work for you? Do you like it?
Yeah.
What do you like about it? What seems right in our 2020s era, or perhaps in a wider sense about how that object in stone is relating to the life of Kugwano and what we can continue to learn?
They didn't do it in marble. It was in slate. So
it's in
slate. I think that's of course the natural color of slate is black. So it was a sort of a connection that way with him. And so to get back to Henry Jermyn.
Mm-hmm.
So I said that he was asked to join this company.
Mm.
Now the company didn't last that long because of the competition with the Dutch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Simply disrupted the whole process of making money.
Mm.
They did make some money, but so they restarted the company,
mm-hmm.
and he called it the Royal African Company.
Mm.
That's the one most people know.
Yeah, and that company was hugely exploitative
Yes.
in relation to enslavement. That was really infamous quite quickly.
Yes, so I assume that Henry Jermyn simply rolled his stock over from the Company of Royal Volunteers into the Royal African Company.
Right.
Now,
I see.
there's was one of the, I did a lot of reading. One of the readings I did was by a professor up at Lancaster University named William Pettigrew. And so he came down here to talk to me about this.
Mm.
And what I was surprised at, and this is why I say it gets complicated, is that he did not roll his stock over.
Oh, so you thought that Jermyn kept his investment, but actually when the company changed, he did not. Does that mean that he withdrew his investment, or? That's very complicated. That's an interesting choice, but it would have been his choice, right? Where when the company changes, he's like, I'm out. I'm not going to stay and do this.
Right. And I asked him why. He said, well, we don't think it was moral objections.
Okay.
So
he doesn't get to be a hero for us then. It's just money. It's not ethics.
So yeah. So that was interesting because I went down to the National Archives and tried to look up what he got paid after 1662, and I couldn't find his name anywhere. And of course, if he didn't own any stock in the company, of course he wouldn't get paid.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. The money was in, and then effectively if I can use this phrase, he cashed in his chips, and then that was it. So yeah, that's fascinating, because it means that one of the deep questions, which I know we continue to have, is the relationship between Jermyn's money and the foundation of St. James's Church itself, and its 1680s earliest moments of its history. So this is the moment where Mary Beale, who's another really significant member of St. James's, who is buried here, whose monument is here as well, at least a new form of her monument is here. She was born in 1633, and she died in 1699. So I often think of her, and indeed Caguano too. Of course, many people across the generations, where it's possible that their main doorway, their main entry into St. James's was not from the Piccadilly through the courtyard at all, but was through that south door. So they would have come up, both of them in their different generations, from Pall Mall, because they were both there, living across the centuries, obviously different times, so they never knew one another, but they were both living on Pall Mall at different times, and then they would have come through St. James's Square and up through that north-south vista, right through that central door to come in. And I wonder what it must have been like for people of across these years, such totally different, politically diametrically opposed views on something as foundational and as destructive as the slave trade. They all would have come in together, perhaps side by side, to worship on Sundays. It reminds me a little bit of the kind of political difference, to say the very least, that people have gone through and that we now experience too in a different way in our own time. What do you think of the idea of St. James's? We say we're for everyone, and we're also justice seeking and focus on the world being transformed for the better. Also, we know that there are plenty of people from lots of different political perspectives, lots of different social perspectives. How important is that to you as a feature of St. James's, that you might be sitting next to someone who has a completely different opinion and perspective from you?
Well, I don't have a problem with that. That's to be expected. That's. I remember in 2023, one of the events we had for Caguano, I raised first I as a joke, I raised it with Lucy to that, I would not have wanted to, the APCM meetings must have been exciting because, but she said no, they didn't believe, Church of England didn't believe in democracy, so that wouldn't have happened.
So can you say again what wouldn't have happened at the annual church meeting, and when?
There wouldn't have been a annual parochial church meeting. So my assumption that people would argue about, because the end of the 18th century was one of those intense periods where they were trying, Wilberforce and other people. Yep. Were trying to get the slave trade abolished.
I see. So then in the late 18th century, had there been annual church meetings, then there might have been a huge, very intense debate about abolition. Yes. And I get it. And so Lucy's point is that democracy wasn't really a thing back then in the Church of England. Who knows? Maybe they had their debates and their anger elsewhere. And we know that Equiano, who was part of the Sons of Africa, knew Caguano, and that Wilberforce too, and perhaps even Clarkson, that they knew about St. James's and maybe spent some time here. And so I love the idea that if it wasn't at an annual meeting, maybe it was, after the service on a Sunday in the courtyard, saying no to one another.
Were you at the event in 2023 when we had Ben Okri?
I sadly did not come to hear Ben Okri speak. I wasn't available that evening, but you were there, right?
I was there.
And he is one of my favorite authors. What did he have to say?
Well, I raised the question, imagine, Caguano is walking up from Pall Mall, come through the south door, come to this church. Now, you did have some people in this church subscribe to the book he wrote.
Yes, he had over 160 subscribers, and some of the people who were here or who were around locally, like Joshua Reynolds, they supported the publication for sure. Yes.
But I raised this, imagine he comes in here. First of all, they don't use his proper name.
Yeah.
He's writing a book that's going to be very controversial because he's calling for the abolition of the slave trade.
Mm.
Now, you think most people will be happy about that?
Maybe not.
Maybe not.
Mm.
And Ben Oak's response was, well, they wouldn't have read the book. True, that maybe they may not have read the book, but they would have heard about it.
He sent his first edition, I think he sent it to the royal family, right? He sent it to the king to say, look, pay attention to what I'm saying and what I'm doing. And then it was printed in a second edition in 1791. So it must have been in circulation in a lot of people's hands.
Right. And I thought, now, I'm thinking, like, no, he would have gotten grief for that.
Yeah. No, he would have, I'm sure, been very heavily criticized. And that's one of those things where, much like his life after the 1790s, we just don't have the story. We don't have the records.
Right.
And so there's something about all of the open questions around his life and around the life of many different people at St. James's, where it's like we have this snapshot. And most of the people who are associated with St. James's in our memorials, they didn't write books. Some of them were illustrators or poets or painters, but a lot of them, Cugoano wrote his own autobiography as a political and as a theological statement, insisting upon the total global abolition of enslavement, and said very clearly, as well you know, that it's impossible to be a Christian and to be okay with slavery, whether one profits directly or not, to simply turn a blind eye or to imagine that there is something even slightly okay with this. It's just not compatible with the Bible or with Christianity. So he must have been really quite a person in and around this neighborhood for people to reckon with.
Especially if they were making money from slavery.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. Talk about some unknown things. Back to Jermyn. We still are not sure exactly. We know he gave money to build this church. We still don't know exactly when he gave the money to the Church of England. I've been to Lambeth Palace Library. I've been to London Metropolitan Archive, the City of Westminster Archive, and I cannot nail down exactly when he gave the money and how much money that was.
I wish we knew. It would be such a moment in the foundation of the church in history if we knew. So hopefully one day, somewhere, somehow, that piece of the puzzle will drop into your expertise and into the way that we can learn about the history of St. James's together. Now, by way of conclusion, I wonder whether or not you have anything else that you would like to share or that you would like to mention as part of this conversation series. Perhaps something that you're anticipating about the South Door being finished. Imagine in hopefully a few weeks' time, the weather's going to be warmer, the sun is shining, and you walk yourself, perhaps that route that Cugoano walked, from Pall Mall up through St. James's Square. You can see the door to St. James's in front of you, and you make your way across these new installed ledger stones from the late 18th, the early 19th century, and you enter St. James's through this door that has been bricked up for over 150 years. Imagine that scene. What does that feel like?
Well, it's not going to be anything special for me because I knew about the door, but it would just never really registered with me. I would probably say, "Oh, that looks nice."
That looks nice. Yeah, I see what you mean. I'm really looking forward to seeing how people interact with the space of the church differently. and what it might be like to even be able to read people's names who have been part of the records of St. James's for many, many years, but who we've kind of just not seen before. Out in the courtyard, I often walk past that memorial, the ledger stone to James Gilray, or I'll come in via the narthex and I'll see that Pomeroy, who was a sculptor and a Royal Academician, he's there. So like Caguano himself, we'll have a set of names that we can explore more, and hopefully we can connect to our moment today as well.
Do we know why they decided to close up the south door?
Apparently, as far as I'm aware, they decided to close up the south door in the 19th century because they needed to put in just a few more pews because St. James's was bursting with people. So if we can imagine that as a bright future for us as well, where we just think, oh my gosh, you try to come in on a Sunday, you can't find a seat. There's so many people there. So let's look forward to that too. That's definitely possible. It's been really nice talking to you, and I'm so glad that you wanted to be a part of this project. Thank you.
You're welcome.